So hello and welcome back to our next video on your introduction to MemoQ. So if you remember from our first video, we have created our project inside MemoQ, we have imported our source files, we've imported a translation memory using our TMX file, and we've already carried out our analysis and our word counts of the files. And let's assume then that our quote has been accepted by the client. So we're now ready to start the next stage. So the next stage is not to go straight into translation. What we're going to do next is in the preparation stage, we're actually going to extract some terminology. So I'm going to open my first file for translation. Let's take our HTML file to begin with, and I'm simply double clicking on that to open the project, to open the file. Now if I open this HTML file and have a look, you can see that something's gone wrong here. This isn't quite the view that I was expecting to see. I've got those funny characters where it looks to me this would be a clear indication of the encoding having gone wrong on this file. So I'm going to close this down for now, and I'm going to come back to this translations window. So I'm hoping that this problem is something wrong with the import that I did and not something that's wrong with the file. So to check that, I'm simply going to right click on it and I'm going to re-import it. So again, I'm going to go with that import with options. I'm going to scroll to that source files folder, and I was using the Spanish document. I'm going to take the HTML, I'm going to open. Now if you remember, it brings up this other window where we can then check these things. So I'm going to have to check the filter and the configuration, because I think that what's happened is that MemoQ hasn't quite imported my HTML file using Unicode. I think it may have imported it using something else. So I'm just going to check. I'm going to click on that box and I'm going to have a look around. Now it says here that Unicode UTF-8 is the one that's being used, but it doesn't have this checkbox ticked. So I'm going to make sure that it is using Unicode by checking this box. It could be that in my HTML file there is another instruction specified. It might be a different type of encoding, but I'm going to force MemoQ by ticking this box to make sure that it is using Unicode UTF-8 when I import this file into the project. So I'm going to OK that, and I'm going to ask it then to re-import this file. Hopefully now when I double click on it I'll get a better view, so fingers crossed. There we go. That looks much better. If I look now, you can see my accented characters are displaying in the way that I'd hoped they would. So this is much better. So that's something to be aware of when you're importing HTML files. You might need to change the filter and the configuration to force MemoQ to use the Unicode UTF-8 encoding. So once more, before we go any further, let's just have a little look at the interface that we're working with. So this here is our segmented document, our bilingual file. We've got our source file on the one side, we've got our target file waiting for our translations. Over here we've got our translation results. So this window will be showing the results from your term bases, from your translation memories, from any other external resources that you might have integrated, like machine translation. And if we'd use the Live Docs feature, it would also be showing, hopefully, results from the Live Docs corpus as well. And then down here, we've got our HTML preview, so we can actually see the web page, we can see how it's laid out, as sometimes those visual clues can be really useful to us when it comes to choosing just the right word for a given context. So MemoQ gives us a nice little view down here. If you remember, the preview said it wasn't working so well on the PowerPoint file, but certainly it appears to be working on the HTML. So before I start translating, I want to go through some preparatory stages, not least of all term extraction, because MemoQ does include a term extraction feature by default, and I can access this feature by going to preparation and to scrolling along here to extract terms. Now again, you might want to have a look at some of the other settings yourself and investigate some of these. MemoQ can pull terminology from various different sources. You might want to have a think about what those sources are. And again, it also uses a stop word list. You might want to think about why a stop word list would be useful to you and how you might integrate one of these into your project. For now, I'm simply going to change the session name. I'm going to call it the same as my project so I know what it's related to, and call it extraction. and I'm simply going to accept the defaults, and I'm going to click OK, and then I will wait patiently while MemoQ processes that for me. So now if I scroll through, you can see that MemoQ has pulled out what it thinks are terms in my project. Now, I have to decide whether MemoQ is right about this. Do these terms need to be translated? And if so, what would be the acceptable translations for these? Now, I can click on these, and each one underneath is giving me the instance from the source text or from any of the other sources that it's looking at. It's giving me a reference there. It's allowing me to see that portion of text within context to decide on its translation. So I'm simply going to pick some of these terms and I'm going to translate them as I go through. So by the magic of pausing my recording whilst I work, I've managed to add in a few terms. If I scroll down here, you can see that I've added them in. Now all I've done at the moment is to simply type the term into the target box, but I have to do a little bit more to it. If you look down here, you can see that at the moment none of my terms have been accepted. It's offering me 154 potential terms, but none of those have been accepted yet, even though I've typed in to the target section here what my preferred translation would be. In order to accept these terms, we use a good old Control-Enter, our favourite shortcut from Trados, and if I press Control and Enter and I move through, you can see now that one term has been accepted. And you must accept these terms if they're to be sent to the term base. If you don't type the term and then use your Control-Enter, the terms will not be exported when you click the button. So I'm going to go through and I'm going to make sure that I've accepted my terms. Now you can see that I've not actually entered a translation for all of the terms that were suggested to me. All I'm doing is picking out what's going to be useful to me in the translation. I'm using this window here as a reference. I can have a look at what these segments are relating to, and I can decide whether I think I need to preserve these target translations or whether it would be easier to come up with a translation during the translation session. But for now I'm just accepting these terms. I've got 6 terms accepted now. I don't think I added any more. That's all of my terms that I've typed in so far. So have a go at adding a few terms for yourselves. Once you've added the terms and you've accepted them, then you can use the feature of export to term base. So if we come back to my project home, and let's have a look then at my project term base. If I go to project home tab and I come to my term bases section, this is the one that I created, but all I did was create an empty one. If I right click on this, I can go to edit, and this will open my term base for me. There you go, you can see there's nothing in it at the moment. So I'm going to come back to my extraction, my term extraction, and I'm going to export these terms, these 6 that I've accepted. I'm going to export them to the term base. It's picked up on which term base I'm using, and I simply have to OK that. So now, fingers crossed, let's go and have a look at that term base again, and we should find that there are some terms in there. So if we click on edit, there we go. It's taken those terms that I sent from the term extraction. So in your handout we ask you to play around with some of the entries in your term base and see what else you can do within the term base itself. So we're using this one, the FSF acronym, the Free Software Foundation, and you can see that it's selected down here. If I come to usage and I go to usage on both, I can select that this is a forbidden term. And I'm going to select those boxes and I'm going to see what kind of an impact that has on the translation itself when I start to work through it. So I'm going to close this down for now, and I'm also going to close down my term extraction session. I'm going to come back then to my HTML file that I'm already working on. So I'm ready to start translating, and I'm going to start to enter my translation now. Now, because I'd marked FSF as a forbidden term, you can see then that FSF is not showing up on my list of suggestions down here. Now this was because I checked it on both the source side and the target side as a forbidden term. If I want to see that differently, I can come back to my term base and I can right click on it to edit it. If I come back in now to the source side and I uncheck this box, and then I close my term base down, Let's come back to that document. I'm going to close it down actually, and then I'm going to reopen it, because sometimes that helps it pick up the changes that I've made. So I'm going to open this HTML file. It's still not showing up, but if I scroll down to the segment that has FSF without the brackets, you can see then that there's a different colour that has appeared alongside the FSF suggestion. So I've got one here that's blue, and I've got one here that's black. The black one is my forbidden term, and this is how it shows up on your term-based Windows result. So for now, I'm simply going to work through and I'm going to enter my translations. And you can see as I start to type certain words, it's already auto-suggesting, a bit almost like the predictive texting that you have on your mobile phone, but it's auto-suggesting those. And all I've had to do there was type the first letter, and then it's put this suggestion in. If I click the enter button, it will just insert the whole thing for me. And then in brackets, I'm going to put the FSF. And again, to move down in my translation, I'm going to use Control and Enter to send that to the translation memory. So you can carry on working then through your translation. If we go all the way down to that segment that contains the FSF, let's see what happens if we use that forbidden term. So there's tags in this one. I'm going to copy to the target, copy the source to target. And again, you might want to take note of the shortcuts for that. I'm going to delete the Spanish punctuation, and I'm going to overwrite it with my English. If it will allow me to enter the term I'd like. I'm going to delete it from here then. And then I'm going to use Control and Enter. And you can see that instantly I've had a little lightning strike that appears down here, and this is a warning to me, so I can double click this and it can see there that that term is actually the forbidden term that was taken from our term base. So you can see how that forbidden term plays out then once you're in your translation session. So now as I go through, I might want to investigate the use of other language resources, maybe some machine translation integration. I can come up here and I can check my options, and I can see what's already been enabled. So I want to check then which terminology plugins are enabled. I'm wanting to check that I've got these enabled. If it says enabled and not configured, then I can click on options, and I will need to actually set up an account with these people in order to be able to use their service. So maybe this is something you'd like to do, and you could integrate their terminology work into your translations as well. Alternatively, if I have a look at the translation memory plugins, I've got that My Memory plugin as well, I've got the Taos plugin, and I've got various other options that I might want to play around with. So again, investigate those. But as a final resource that I might want to add to my project, I'm going to use the Live Docs feature. So if I come back to my project home, if you remember, I'm clicking on Live Docs here, if you remember we said that MemoQ can actually automatically perform the alignment for you, and you can check it if you want to, or alternatively you could just start working with it and see what the quality of matches that it can return to you. Now the quality of the matches and the quality of the alignment that it can do is of course going to follow that same garbage in, garbage out principle that we always work with. If you take two documents that have been translated and you simply put them straight into the auto aligner, there's a chance that when the document was translated, the sentence structures may have changed. So if you think sometimes when you're translating a very, very long sentence, you might actually want to break that up into two sentences in your actual translation, and maybe it doesn't always then correspond with the one segment that it came from in the original source text. So sometimes we might end up in a situation where the one source segment actually has two translated segments that it corresponds to. So that can sometimes set the alignment off slightly awkwardly. It maybe doesn't return the best quality results to you. In that case, you could go in and you can manually edit the alignment from there. But first, let's have a look at actually performing the alignment, actually using the Live Docs feature. So we're back in this Live Docs window in our Project Home tab, and I'm going to create or use a new one. Again, don't forget, this is where you need to change to your M drive, but I'm on my laptop, so I'm going to be staying on the C drive. And I'm going to change the name of the corpus to match the project, so I know which one it's related to. And I'm going to click OK. Now you've been given some files to play around with in that MemoQ folder, so I'm going to use some of those. I'm going to go to Add Alignment Pair up here. It's a very small button, but I'm going to click on that one and I'm going to add in my source document. Now I'm going Spanish into English. Now this is my source files folder, so I want to come out of this one and I want to go to the folder called To Align, and I'm going to take the relevant folder. The relevant files, sorry. Now if you can see, because these are HTML files, there are also extra folders in there. We're not going into any of these folders. These are simply the image files and the style sheets that go alongside the HTML file itself. But I'm just going to take the HTML. So I'm adding that one as my source file, and then I'm going to add my target file, which in my case will be English. So I'll add those in, and now those are added in, that's all I need to do. I know it seems strange, but I can simply click OK. MemoQ is dealing with that. It's created this alignment for me, and I can either choose to accept the automatic alignment and then go back to my translation and carry on translating, or if I prefer, I can double click on that and it will open that alignment for me to then verify the matches that have been produced. Now, unfortunately for me, this file probably needed a little bit of working on before I actually did the alignment with it. You can see that actually there's some rather bad matches that have been made here, things that clearly don't correspond very well. So I would need to then review these links. I can remove them all and I can recreate them, and I can make sure that this alignment is of good quality. But remember that alignment is supposed to be a fairly quick process. What I might choose to do is to simply remove these links and only relink those segments that are useful. I can ignore segments that are not useful to me, and if I leave those segments unlinked, then they won't be used as part of the Live Docs corpus. So I'm going to close that down for now, and of course I'm ready to come back to my translation. But that brings us to the end of your handout and to the end of this video. So I hope that was useful for you, and I hope that you'll try out all of the steps that we've looked at here, and as well as investigating some of those extra features.